It was 2 in the morning in Burlington, Vermont, the kind of quiet winter night when the whole world seemed frozen. Snow drifted down in the glow of the streetlights outside, and the only sound in the Whitmore house was the steady hum of the radiator. Harper lay awake, staring at the ceiling, one hand pressed against the side of her swollen belly. The twins kicked softly, restless, as if they too could feel her unease. Her back throbbed, every muscle in her body heavy and strained. She turned carefully, hoping not to wake Andrew, but she didn't have to worry. He was sound asleep, one arm flung over the blanket, breathing deep and even oblivious. For a moment, she just watched him. The man who once whispered love into her hair now slept with his back turned, miles away even in the same bed. Harper tried to remember the last time he'd reached for her hand without her having to offer it first. She couldn't. Slowly she sat up, wincing at the pressure in her ribs, and pulled on her cardigan. The floorboards creaked under her as she made her way downstairs. The kitchen was dark except for the soft blue light from the snow outside. Harper filled the kettle and waited, her reflection faint on the window pane. She used to love this house, the maple cabinets, the lake view, but now it felt too quiet, too empty. The tea hissed as it poured into her cup, the scent of chamomile filling the air. She leaned on the counter and let the warmth seep into her hands. Her thoughts wandered back to the early days with Andrew. The laughter, the road trips, the way he used to look at her as if she were the best thing that had ever happened to him. He was the one who'd wanted a family so badly. He'd said it was all he'd ever dreamed of, coming home to little feet running down the hall, someone calling him Dad. She'd smiled then, believing him. But the day they learned she was carrying twins, something inside him changed. The joy on his face faded into calculation. The stress at work became his excuse for every cold word. Every night he stayed out late. Every morning he skipped breakfast with her. Harper tried to tell herself it was just the pressure, that he'd come around once the babies arrived. But as the months passed, his patience vanished entirely. He stopped touching her stomach. He stopped asking how she felt. When she mentioned baby names, he just grunted and went back to his phone. Now, standing in the half-light, she ran a hand over her belly and whispered, "It's okay. I've got you." The twins moved again, a slow, gentle roll beneath her palm. She smiled weakly. "We'll be fine. Somehow." Outside, the wind pushed against the window, a low, hollow sound that made the house shudder. Harper stared into the darkness, trying to picture the life waiting on the other side of all this. The nursery she'd painted, the laughter she hoped would fill these walls again. But beneath that fragile hope was something heavier, something she didn't want to name. She turned off the light and climbed the stairs, step by careful step. Andrew didn't stir when she slid back into bed. His face was turned away, half hidden by shadow. Harper pulled the blanket over her stomach, her eyes wide open in the dark. She told herself that things would change once the twins were born, that Andrew would remember the man he used to be. But as she lay there, listening to the snow fall and the silence between them, she felt the truth settle deep in her chest. Something in their marriage had already broken, and no amount of love or hope or new life would ever make it whole again. Morning light crept across the snow outside, soft and pale, tinting the kitchen walls with a gentle gold. Harper stood by the stove, carefully flipping pancakes, the smell of bacon filling the air. She'd been awake since dawn, hoping that today would be different, that maybe a warm breakfast and a smile could melt the frost that had settled between them. She wanted the morning to feel normal, domestic, like the life they used to have. Andrew came down the stairs with the same heavy, impatient steps she'd come to dread. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his phone was already in his hand. Without even glancing at the table, he muttered, "You were up half the night again. I could barely sleep with you moving around." Harper froze, spatula still in hand. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "My back hurt. The babies were. Yeah, well, he cut in. dropping his phone onto the counter with a thud. Maybe you could at least try not to wake the whole house next time. Her stomach tightened. She wanted to shout, to remind him that the whole house was just the two of them, that she hadn't slept properly in weeks, that she was carrying their children while he treated her like a stranger. Instead, she turned off the stove and set the last pancake onto the plate. "Breakfast's ready," she said quietly, forcing a smile. Andrew sat down, scrolling through his emails. "Bacon's too crispy," he murmured after a bite. "And the coffee's cold." Harper's throat burned. She looked at him across the table, the same man she'd once fallen in love with, now a stranger wearing her husband's face. "I just wanted us to have one nice morning," she whispered. He looked up, eyebrows raised as if she'd spoken nonsense. "A nice morning?" He laughed under his breath. "Harper, I have a full day ahead. You think pancakes are going to fix anything?" Her heart clenched. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "But you could at least say thank you." Andrew leaned back, smirking faintly, the kind of smile that wasn't joy but control. "You want me to thank you for doing what everyone else does? For making breakfast? Come on." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. "I'm not asking for much," she said. "Just a little kindness. I'm scared, Andrew. I'm doing my best, and I just want to know you still care." For a moment, he looked at her, really looked at her. The woman in front of him, pale from sleepless nights, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. Then, just as quickly, his expression closed again. "You're overthinking everything," he said, pushing his chair back. "You always do." He grabbed his jacket, slung it over his arm, and headed for the door. Harper called out after him, "When did we stop being on the same side?" He paused, hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. "I'll be late," was all he said. The door shut with a soft click, but to Harper it sounded final. She stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by untouched food and the echo of his indifference. The pancakes cooled on the plate, the bacon went limp, the coffee turned bitter. She sat down slowly, staring at the empty chair across from her. The steam rising from her cup blurred her vision, and when the first tear fell, it landed in the dark coffee, rippling once before disappearing. Harper realized then that love doesn't always end with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it ends quietly over breakfast, when the person sitting across from you stops seeing you at all. The afternoon sun hung low over Burlington, spilling faint light through the frosted windows. Harper hummed softly as she moved from room to room, her steps slow but determined. The scent of pine lingered in the air from the small wreath she'd hung by the door that morning. She wanted the house to look ready, warm, welcoming, like the family Christmas she'd always imagined for her children. She paused to catch her breath, one hand braced against the wall, the other resting on her belly. "Just a little more," she whispered to the twins. "Then we can rest." Her back ached with every motion, but she ignored it. There was something about cleaning, about putting things in order, that made her feel like she still had control. She dragged a chair to the window and climbed carefully, wiping away the thin layer of frost with a rag. Outside, flakes of snow drifted lazily through the air, landing softly on the cold glass. She smiled faintly, imagining the babies watching their first snowfall. The next second, her balance shifted. The chair wobbled beneath her. Harper gasped, grabbing for the curtain rod, but her fingers slipped. She fell, the sound of impact sharp against the carpeted floor. A burst of pain shot through her abdomen, hot, tearing, immediate. She tried to move, but her body wouldn't cooperate, and then she felt it, the unmistakable warmth spreading beneath her. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "No, please. No." She pressed her hands against her belly, trying to steady her breathing, but a wave of pain rolled through her again. Stronger this time. Panic clawed up her throat. The twins. She had to get help. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone on the coffee table, just inches away. Every movement felt like climbing a mountain. She finally grabbed it and hit Andrew's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. "Come on, Andrew," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please pick up." The pain hit again, deeper, more urgent. She curled on her side, gasping. Desperate. She opened her messages and typed as fast as she could, her fingers slippery with sweat. "Please come to the hospital. I'm in labor." She hit send and let the phone drop beside her, breathing shallow and fast. A minute passed, then another. No reply, no call back. The silence in the room was unbearable, filled only with the ticking of the wall clock and the distant hum of the heater. Her vision blurred as she tried to focus. Something was wrong. She could feel it. The pressure was unbearable now. Harper cried out, clutching her stomach, praying the babies would hold on just a little longer. She needed someone, anyone. Meanwhile, across town, the message buzzed on a phone lying on a polished oak desk at Carter Financial Group. David Carter looked up from the paperwork he'd been reviewing, his brow furrowing as he read the text. "Please come to the hospital. I'm in labor." He blinked, confused. Harper Whitmore, he recognized the name. She was Andrew's wife. But why would she text him that? He tried calling Andrew immediately. No answer. He frowned, tried again. Still nothing. The unease in his chest grew heavier by the second. David stood abruptly, grabbing his coat. He called his assistant on the way out. "Cancel my meetings," he said. "There's an emergency." Outside, snow had started to fall harder, the wind carrying sharp flurries across the parking lot. He moved, quickly, heart pounding. He didn't know what he was walking into, only that someone needed help. And she didn't have anyone else. Back at the house, Harper's breathing grew shallow, her body trembling as contractions tightened like iron bands. She clutched her phone again, praying she'd typed the message correctly. The world was fading into blurs of white and pain when she finally heard it, a distant siren, cutting through the storm. Relief washed over her in waves just before everything went black. The hospital's fluorescent lights hummed softly, their glow pale against the gray Vermont morning. David Carter hurried through the sliding glass doors of the University of Vermont Medical Center, shaking snow from his coat. The text still glowed on his phone screen. "Please come to the hospital. I'm in labor." At the front desk, a nurse looked up. "Mr. Whitmore." He blinked. "I know. Before he could finish, another nurse appeared holding a clipboard. "Your wife's in active labor. We need you to sign these forms." David opened his mouth to correct them again, but the words wouldn't come. He caught the nurse's anxious expression and realized arguing would only waste precious time. "Just tell me where she is," he said. They led him through a maze of white corridors. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air, sharp and cold. Somewhere a baby cried. When they reached the delivery room, David froze at the sight of Harper, pale, drenched in sweat, gripping the rails of the hospital bed as another contraction tore through her. She didn't see him. Her eyes were shut tight, her lips whispering something between a prayer and a plea. "Andrew, please!" David stepped forward, instinctively taking her hand. "It's okay," he said softly, unsure if she could hear him. "You're safe. Just breathe." The doctor gave a curt nod. "Good timing, Mr. Whitmore. We're almost there." David didn't correct him. He stayed right where he was, feeling her trembling fingers in his. Minutes blurred into hours. The room filled with the rhythm of urgency. Nurses calling out numbers, the steady beeping of monitors, Harper's sharp, exhausted cries. And then, at last, it happened, the thin, piercing cry of a newborn, followed by another. The sound cut through the sterile air like sunlight through fog. "It's 2 boys," the doctor announced. "Both small, but breathing well." Harper slumped back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. "They're okay," she whispered hoarsely. "They're perfect," David murmured. his throat tight. He watched as the nurse placed the tiny, swaddled bundles beside her. Harper reached for them weakly, her hands trembling as she touched their faces. Moments later, exhaustion overtook her. She fell asleep, her grip on the blanket slackening. David stood there for a long time, watching her chest rise and fall, listening to the quiet miracle of newborn breaths. He felt an ache he hadn't known in years, something like longing, something like hope. When the nurse turned to him, smiling softly, he shook his head. "I'm not her husband," he said quietly. The woman frowned, confused. "Oh, then you're a friend," he said. "Just someone who couldn't ignore a message." The nurse hesitated, then nodded. "Well, whoever you are, you came when she needed someone. That's what matters." A few hours later, Harper stirred awake. Her throat was dry, her mind foggy. The babies were sleeping in the bassinet beside her, their tiny chests rising and falling. On the bedside table lay a folded note. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. "I got your message. You sent it to me by mistake. But don't worry, you're not alone." Below the words was a small receipt slip from the hospital billing desk. "Paid in full." Harper stared at it, blinking through tears. On the chair by the window sat a paper bag filled with baby formula, diapers, and 2 small knitted hats. No one was in the room now, just the faint trace of a man's cologne lingering in the air. She pressed the note to her chest, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Shame, gratitude, and disbelief tangled inside her. For the first time in months, someone had stayed, not because they had to, but because they chose to. Outside, snow continued to fall softly over Burlington, blanketing the world in quiet white. And somewhere down the corridor, David Carter sat in the waiting area, hands folded, eyes tired, but ready to make sure that when she woke again, she wouldn't be alone. Snow still blanketed the streets when Harper was finally discharged from the hospital. She cradled her sons, 2 tiny bundles wrapped in soft blue blankets, as David helped her into his car. The drive back to her apartment was quiet except for the rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers pushing aside the falling flakes. Harper's heart was full of nervous hope. She told herself that maybe Andrew had a reason for not being there, that perhaps he'd been stuck, scared, or overwhelmed. She wanted to believe that when she walked through the door, she'd find him waiting. When they reached the small brick building, David stepped out first, holding the door for her. The stairwell smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. Harper's hands shook as she fished the key from her coat pocket. "Thank you," she whispered, voice thin, "for everything." "You don't have to thank me," David said gently. "Let's get you and the boys inside." The door opened with a soft creak, and Harper froze. The apartment was empty. Not quiet, not messy. Empty. The couch was gone. The TV stand was bare, a faint rectangle of dust marking where it used to sit. The framed photos on the wall, wedding pictures, family trips, the first ultrasound had vanished. Even the curtains were missing. The silence pressed down on her until she could barely breathe. She stumbled forward, looking from corner to corner, as if her eyes could conjure the life that used to fill the room. No, her voice cracked. She opened the bedroom door. Drawers hung open, closets gutted. Andrew's cologne still lingered faintly in the air, but he was nowhere. On the kitchen counter lay a single folded note. She reached for it with trembling fingers. "I'm leaving. It's better this way." That was all. No explanation. No apology. Just 7 words that shattered everything still standing inside her. Harper sank to her knees, clutching the note to her chest. The babies stirred in their carriers, startled by the sound of her sobs. She tried to muffle them, but the grief came in waves, raw, uncontrollable. David knelt beside her, one hand on her shoulder. He didn't try to speak at first. He just stayed there, steady and silent, letting her cry. Finally, when her sobs quieted into shaking breaths, he said softly, "He doesn't deserve your tears, Harper." She looked up, her face streaked with tears. He was supposed to be here. We were supposed to be a family. David's gaze was kind but firm. You still are, just not the way you imagined. He glanced toward the babies. They're your real family now. Everything else can be rebuilt. Harper wiped her face with the back of her hand, her body trembling from exhaustion. I don't even know where to start. Then let me help you, he said simply. You can't stay here. Not like this. He stood, lifted the car seats with practiced care, and turned toward the door. Harper hesitated only a moment before following. When she looked back one last time, the apartment seemed smaller than ever, a hollow shell of promises that had already turned to dust. Outside, the cold air hit her face, sharp and clean. David opened the passenger door, helping her settle in as the twins slept quietly beside her. Where are we going? She asked faintly. My place, he said. It's not far by the lake. You'll have a warm bed, food, peace. Just until you figure things out. Harper nodded slowly, staring out the window as the car pulled away. The building that had once been her home grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared behind the falling snow. She pressed her hand against her belly where her sons had once been and whispered to herself, We're not alone anymore. Beside her, David said nothing, but the quiet conviction in his presence felt like the first solid ground she had touched in a very long time. The wooden house by Lake Champlain glowed softly against the falling snow, its windows lit with golden light and the faint scent of cinnamon drifting through the air. Harper stood by the kitchen counter, dusting flour from her hands, while Sophie Carter, David's 6-year-old daughter, giggled beside her, her fingers sticky with cookie dough. Too much sugar? Harper asked with a smile, watching the little girl sneak another pinch from the bowl. Sophie grinned, her front teeth missing. Daddy says there's no such thing as too much sugar at Christmas. Harper laughed, the sound light and warm, echoing softly in the kitchen. It felt strange and wonderful to laugh again. In the weeks since David had taken her and the twins in, life had begun to take on a rhythm she hadn't realized she missed. Mornings filled with the smell of coffee, afternoons spent rocking the babies by the fireplace, evenings when the lake outside glimmered under the moonlight like glass. Through the window, the frozen water shimmered beneath the pale sky. The world seemed to have slowed down in this house, far from everything that had broken her. Almost done. David's voice called from the living room. Almost, Harper replied. But your daughter might eat the entire batch before it's baked. He appeared in the doorway, smiling, his flannel sleeves rolled up, eyes tired but kind. It's Christmas, he said, shrugging. Rules don't apply. Harper shook her head, trying not to smile too wide. You're going to regret that when she's bouncing off the walls. Sophie laughed and reached up for David, who lifted her effortlessly, spinning her once before setting her down. The warmth that filled the room wasn't just from the fire. It came from something quieter, deeper. Harper hadn't felt this safe in years. Later that evening, when Sophie was asleep and the twins lay quietly in their crib near the fireplace, Harper and David sat together on the couch. The lights from the Christmas tree flickered gently, reflecting off the ornaments Sophie had insisted on hanging all at once on the same branch. David looked at the tree for a long moment before speaking. Laura used to love this time of year, he said softly. She'd play carols from the moment Thanksgiving ended. Drove me crazy, but now I'd give anything to hear it again. Harper turned toward him, her voice gentle. She must have been a wonderful woman. She was, he said, strong, kind. She never complained, even when things got bad. Harper didn't ask about the illness. She could hear the ache in his voice. Instead, she said, quietly, she'd be proud of the way you've raised Sophie. David smiled faintly. And you, how you've managed all this. 2 newborns, after everything you've been through. Most people would have fallen apart. Harper stared into the fire, her heart tightening. I did fall apart. You just found me before I disappeared completely. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly. A few nights later, Harper was rocking one of the twins when she heard a voice through the open living room window. Low, hurried, familiar. Her breath caught. Andrew. She set the baby gently down and moved closer to the window. The cold air stung her face as she leaned in. Andrew's voice came through clearly over the phone. Yeah, tonight. Melissa's got the files. We meet them at 8, easy money. Harper's pulse quickened. Files. Company. She didn't know the details, but she knew enough to feel dread. Quietly, she stepped away and found David in his study. I think you need to hear something, she said, her voice shaking. She repeated every word she'd heard. David's expression hardened instantly. He picked up his phone. Stay here, he said calmly, dialing the police. This ends tonight. Hours later, the news came in. Andrew Whitmore and Melissa Kane had been arrested in a downtown parking lot, caught selling confidential company data to a competitor. Harper sat by the window, the Christmas tree lights flickering behind her, snow swirling outside in the dark. Her hands trembled as she held her sons close. It wasn't revenge she felt, just an ending. The chapter that had once defined her life had closed, quietly, cleanly, under the silent witness of falling snow. In the next room, David was on the phone with the authorities, his voice calm, steady. When he returned, Harper looked up at him through tired tears. He didn't speak. He just placed a gentle hand over hers and said softly, You're safe now. And for the first time in a very long time, she truly believed it. The walls of the Vermont County Detention Center were gray and cold. The kind of place where even sound seemed to fade before it reached the end of a corridor. David waited in the visiting area, his hands folded, his coat draped neatly over the chair beside him. He didn't know why he'd agreed to meet Andrew Whitmore one last time. Perhaps closure, perhaps curiosity. But as the door opened and Andrew entered, escorted by an officer, David realized it was something simpler. He wanted to see the man who had caused so much pain and understand what kind of emptiness could make someone destroy their own family. Andrew looked smaller than David remembered. His hair was unkempt, his once confident posture now slumped. When the officer left, the room filled with a tense silence. I wasn't expecting you, Andrew muttered, sitting down across from him. I know, David said calmly. I'm not here for you. I'm here because Harper deserves an ending. Andrew smirked faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. So, she sent you to speak for her now? I guess that fits. Always needed someone to save her. David's expression didn't change. No, she didn't send me. She doesn't even know I'm here. I just thought you might want to understand what you've done before it's too late. Andrew leaned back, folding his arms. What I've done? Please. You act like I'm a monster. You don't know what it's like living with someone who gives up on herself. Harper used to be fun, spontaneous. Then she got pregnant, and everything changed. All she ever talked about was the babies, the bills, the house. It was suffocating. David's voice was steady but edged with steel. She carried your children while you carried your ego. Andrew's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. You think you know her? You've known her for what, 2 months? Try years of her moods, her clinginess. Melissa made me feel alive again. She reminded me of what I used to be. David let the words hang in the air for a moment. And what are you now? He asked quietly. A man in a prison jumpsuit, facing a felony charge because of her. Is that what feeling alive means to you? Andrew's smirk faltered. He stared at the table between them, tracing the edge with his thumb. The silence stretched until David slid a folder across to him. These are the custody papers, David said. You're still listed as the father of record. If you sign this, you surrender all parental rights to Harper. You'll have no legal claim, no visitation, no voice in their future. Andrew looked up sharply. And if I don't? Then I make sure the prosecutor gets every file from your company laptop. The evidence will bury you. You'll be in here for a long time. Andrew. And when you get out, you'll still have 2 children who want nothing to do with you. Andrew stared at him, something flickering behind his eyes. Defiance, shame? Perhaps both. His fingers twitched toward the folder. You'd really do that? David's tone softened, but his conviction didn't waver. This isn't about revenge. It's about peace. For Harper, for those boys. You've already taken enough from them. Now it's time to give something back. For the first time, Andrew's bravado cracked. He looked away, blinking rapidly. She really doesn't want to see me, does she? David shook his head. She doesn't hate you, Andrew. She's just done bleeding for you. A long silence followed. Finally, Andrew picked up the pen. His signature wavered slightly as he wrote his name. When he was done, he pushed the papers back across the table and exhaled shakily. Tell her I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely audible. David stood, gathering the folder. No, he said quietly. You can keep that apology. She doesn't need it anymore. As he walked toward the exit, the guard opened the heavy door, and cold air swept into the room. Behind him, Andrew sat motionless, staring at the signed papers that had just erased him from the only family he'd ever had. For Harper, it was freedom, granted without her having to look back. A year had passed since the day everything changed. The snow outside the Carter house shimmered beneath a pale January sun, the lake frozen over in quiet stillness. Inside, the warmth of family filled every corner. Harper stood at the dining table, papers and pencils spread before her as she reviewed her students' essays. A faint hum of laughter came from the living room, where David and the children were building a pillow fort beside the fireplace. Mom, we need more blankets. Sophie's voice rang out, bright and clear. Harper smiled at the word. You already took all of them, sweetheart, she called back. If you take one more, we'll all freeze. David appeared in the doorway, a blanket draped over his shoulder, mock serious. She's not wrong, he said, but the fort demands reinforcements. Harper shook her head, laughing softly as she set her papers aside. Fine, one more, but this is the last. She handed him the blanket, their fingers brushing for just a moment. Simple, unspoken comfort. It still surprised her sometimes, how normal happiness could feel after so much loss. A year ago, she couldn't imagine this life, mornings filled with lessons and coffee, evenings with giggles and bedtime stories. Now it was the air she breathed. The twins had grown fast, toddling around the house, their laughter blending with Sophie's. When they called David Dad for the first time, Harper cried quietly in the kitchen, overwhelmed by something deeper than joy. That evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Harper found David in his study, his desk lamp casting a warm circle of light. He was holding something small in his hands, a black digital recorder. What's that? She asked. He looked up at her, eyes soft but steady. Closure, he said simply. I've been holding on to this for months, but I think you're ready to hear it. He pressed play. The faint crackle of static filled the air, followed by Andrew's voice, lower, slower than she remembered. She doesn't want to see me, does she? There was a pause, then David's calm reply from that day. She doesn't hate you, Andrew. She's just done bleeding for you. Then came the sound of a pen scratching across paper, followed by Andrew's quiet, broken whisper, Tell her I'm sorry. The room went silent again. Harper closed her eyes. Her throat tightened, but not from anger, just the strange ache of finality. David reached forward and stopped the recording. He signed everything, he said gently. It's done. You and the boys are free. I should have told you sooner. But I wanted you to get there on your own, without him in your shadow. Harper sat down across from him, tears glistening in her eyes. You did the right thing, she said quietly. He met her gaze. You deserve peace, not pity. Her lips trembled into a faint smile. Peace, she repeated. as if testing the word on her tongue. They sat together in silence, the sound of the fireplace crackling softly through the house. Outside, snowflakes drifted across the window pane, catching the moonlight like falling stars. When Harper finally stood, she felt lighter. The years of hurt, the betrayal, the fear, they no longer clung to her. She wasn't someone's abandoned wife anymore, or a victim of circumstance. She was a mother, a teacher, and a woman who had rebuilt her life from ashes into something warm and steady. Before heading upstairs, she paused by the nursery door. The twins slept soundly in their cribs, cheeks flushed from the warmth. Sophie's drawings were pinned to the wall above them, crayon stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun, labeled Mom, Dad, Me, and the boys. Harper smiled through her tears, whispering softly, "Yes, sweetheart, that's exactly who we are now." Downstairs, David switched off the light in his study. The house settled into its familiar hush, and for the first time in years, Harper slept without the weight of the past pressing against her heart. Summer sunlight shimmered on the rippling surface of Lake Champlain, and laughter drifted through the warm air. Harper stood by the kitchen window, watching Sophie pedal her new blue bicycle down the gravel path that circled the yard. The twins were playing in the grass nearby. Their squeals of delight carried on the breeze. The house felt alive, overflowing with the sounds of family. "Keep going, honey," Harper called out, smiling as Sophie's curls bounced behind her helmet. "You've got it this time." "I'm doing it," Sophie shouted back, her voice bright with triumph. Inside, the scent of lemon and rosemary filled the kitchen as Harper stirred the soup on the stove. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to stand still, soaking in the peace of it all, the sunlight through the window, the quiet music from the radio, the rhythm of a life rebuilt. Then came the sound that tore everything apart. A scream, sharp, terrified, cut through the air. Harper froze. "Mom!" Sophie's voice was shrill, panicked. Harper dropped the spoon, her heart jolting into her throat. She raced to the door, her eyes finding Sophie careening down the driveway, the bike wobbling out of control. The front tire hit a rut, sending the bike veering toward the main road that curved past their property. "Sophie!" Harper shouted, running faster than she thought her body could move. A car horn blared. Tires screeched. Without thinking, Harper lunged forward, pushing Sophie hard out of the bike's path. There was a split second of weightlessness, then impact. A sound like thunder, then silence. When David burst through the door, the world had already slowed to a nightmare's crawl. The car was stopped crooked on the road, the driver pale and shaking. Sophie was on the grass, crying but unhurt. And Harper lay on the pavement, motionless, blood streaking down her temple. "Harper!" David's voice broke as he ran to her side, kneeling in the spreading stain of red. Her pulse was faint beneath his shaking fingers. "Stay with me, Harper. Don't you dare leave me too." Her eyes fluttered open for a heartbeat, unfocused, searching for his face. "Sophie," she whispered. "Is she okay?" "She's fine. You saved her." His voice trembled. "You're going to be okay. Do you hear me?" The wail of sirens grew louder as paramedics rushed toward them. David refused to let go of her hand even when they lifted her onto the stretcher, even when they loaded her into the ambulance. "I'm right here," he said, over and over, as if the words could keep her tethered to him. The surgery took hours. David sat outside the operating room, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. Every minute dragged like an eternity. He thought about Laura, his late wife, how helpless he had felt the day she slipped away. The last breath he never got to share. He couldn't lose Harper too. Not now. When the surgeon finally emerged, David stood so quickly his chair clattered behind him. "She's alive," the doctor said. "It was close, but she's stable. We'll need blood transfusions." Her type is rare. David exhaled sharply, relief and fear tangling in his chest. What type? AB negative, the doctor replied. For a long moment, David couldn't speak. It was Laura's blood type, the exact same. As he stood outside Harper's recovery room hours later, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest beneath the hospital blankets, a quiet understanding settled over him. Maybe it wasn't coincidence. Maybe it was grace, some unseen hand weaving second chances out of loss. He reached for her hand, brushing his thumb over her skin. "You were meant to be here," he whispered, voice breaking. "Maybe she sent you to us." Outside, the summer sun dipped behind the mountains, leaving a trail of gold across the lake, the same color as the light in Harper's hair when she smiled. Spring came gently to Vermont that year. The last of the snow had melted from the banks of Lake Champlain, leaving behind glistening trails of water that shimmered under the afternoon sun. The air carried the scent of pine and new beginnings, soft and clean. Harper stood on the porch of the wooden house, her hand resting lightly on the railing as she watched the twins toddle through the grass, their laughter rising into the breeze. Sophie followed close behind, her curls bouncing as she called out for them to slow down. For the first time in months, Harper could stand without pain. The scars were there, faint lines beneath her skin, small reminders of how fragile life could be, but her strength had returned. Every morning, she took a slow walk down to the lake, breathing in the stillness, grateful for the heartbeat she almost lost. Today, though, wasn't just another morning. Today was her wedding day. David appeared behind her, adjusting his tie with clumsy hands. "You'd think after 40 years I'd know how to do this properly," he muttered. Harper turned, smiling softly. "You're doing just fine." She reached out to fix the knot, her fingers brushing his collar. He caught her hand and held it there for a moment. Their eyes met, the quiet understanding between them saying more than words ever could. They had chosen to keep the ceremony small. Just the two of them, the children and the open sky. No grand music, no guests, no expectations. Just peace. By sunset, the family gathered by the lakeshore. The water mirrored the colors of the sky, rose, gold, and faint violet, like the world itself was holding its breath. Sophie carried a handful of wildflowers she had picked from the edge of the property, and the twins clapped their tiny hands, unaware that this was a day that would shape their lives forever. David took Harper's hands in his. "You know," he said softly, his voice catching with emotion, "I never thought I'd find love again. After Laura, I thought that part of me was gone." He paused, smiling faintly. "But then a message came to my phone one night, sent by mistake, and suddenly there you were." Harper's eyes glistened. "Sometimes," she whispered, "the wrong message leads you to the right person." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand trembling slightly. "And sometimes," he said, "God gives you back what you thought you'd lost, in a different shape, but just as precious." The wind stirred lightly, carrying the sound of the children's laughter across the water. Harper looked around at the faces that had become her world, the girl who called her mom, the boys who bore her smile, the man whose steady heart had given her a second chance. They weren't the family she had planned, but they were the family she had been meant to find. As twilight deepened, the lake turned to glass, reflecting the soft glow of lanterns David had strung between the trees. Harper leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the ripples fade. For the first time, she didn't wonder about what might have been. She only felt the quiet certainty of what was. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, David wrapped his arms around her as they stood on the porch overlooking the starlit lake. "You saved Sophie," he murmured. "You saved all of us." Harper smiled, her eyes glimmering in the moonlight. "You saved me first." He kissed her forehead, and together they stood in silence, listening to the soft hum of the night, the sound of a life rebuilt, a love reborn, a miracle they hadn't seen coming. Because once, long ago, she had sent a message to the wrong number. But that mistake became her miracle